My actual question was, does anybody see anything obvious that we have missed in the list of things that Jeff brought up? Requirements that we discussed earlier that we had agreed to and we didn't list, things that we're just missing, etc.
So I have a question, kind of comment. So what I'm hearing here is completely auto-discovery where there is no IP reachability, there is no IGP running, for example, or there is peers which are not on the same subnet like in IXP environment. So that's perfectly valid for part of the auto-discovery effort. The other part of the auto-discovery effort is just to focus on the BGP when you have full reachability to IP layer already within your domain through IGP, for example. So the other part is pretty much what actually the draft which I've co-authored together with Warren and then John and others are describing. So I'm not sure how that part is captured in those requirements which we see right here.
So Robert, your drafts are the ones that I haven't gotten around to re-reviewing yet, but
okay.
I don't specifically recall anything in there about that detail. So am I correctly interpreting that what you're really talking about is what you do when you want to do IBGP and the thing that you want to peer with is far away?
Pretty much what the draft is about in a nutshell is to bootstrap the BGP auto configuration through a dedicated SAFI on the RR. Call it controller, call it whatever you want. Okay. But I thought this was what Kaushik was actually kind of alluding to as well. The reachability is done. You can do it even DNS name for that, and local DNS can resolve it. And all the BGP information, which otherwise you would have to manually type in or push through some script, would be verified / discovered through membership discovery of the peers.
So this is Warren. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but I had thought that the AutoConf design team was specifically focused on data center stuff.
That's a perfect question.
Yeah. And our other document, I think, is more the stuff that's not data center.
Right.
Which to me feels like it might be sufficiently separated from this that it can continue in parallel, right? That it gets discussed in IDR, not in the design team, because it's solving a different problem. But obviously, that's just my view. I'd like to know what the chairs think.
Well, let me throw in there, the easiest way to figure something out of scope is to list that what it is.
So folks, my understanding from the earlier notes, and John was watching this group instead of mine, so I'll plead not having all the information. The first focus was on data center. Whether the design team went beyond that to look at the WAN and IGP is a second focus, because I'd like to see an initial draft coming out of a design team or a group of authors to spur that. I'd love to see both coming at the same time, but that may not be possible. Warren, that was in the slides from last week, and that I considered. You started with the design team. You have a march toward the February delivery date for the March RTF to try to get the data center information out. If I have someone who wants to run it parallel and you have enough steam to do the WAN IXP, that's fine. But the goal was first data center, then WAN IXP. Am I much more clear about that after last week, Warren?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
This is Linda. I have a question. So for the data center and WAN, there will be different requirement, right? So data center, you assume every node BGP is enabled, right? Every link, every port. Do we assume that?
I don't think we do really. Just, I think in the data center, you have much more, things are much more likely to be IBGP pairs, the ones that you're automatically bringing up, you're more likely to have direct layer 2 connectivity that, any packet you send is likely to get there.
Right.
And things are more likely to be a single hop away. In general, and these are all just huge generalizations, right? They're exceptions to all of them. In general, also, the policies are likely to be less complex. BGP policies, I'm meaning. But there may, what we build here might also be applicable to the WAN case, but that's not the primary focus. If what we build happens to also work, across the internet, that might be good, but it's not a strong set of requirements.
So I just feel that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I feel that with those assumptions within data center, then the auto configuration will be much simpler than in the WAN case, right? So
yep.
I think it would be nicer if we have the assumption, like here's the data center requirement, a data center scenario, some of the assumptions put in the front, and then we talk about requirement, and here's the WAN, here general assumptions, and I thought that would be kind of more clear so we can be more focused.
Right, and
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
where this sort of overlaps a bunch of things, and the reason why I'm not trying to not talk about the WAN cases and other cases right now, what I believe we're going to end up with is here's the requirements for the elements BGP needs to know to bring up its peering sessions, and that's going to effectively result in a information model, data model that lets us actually say here's how to bring BGP up. And some of those things will be generally applicable. There'll be some things that are specifically applicable to individual scenarios. There'll be, and then obviously all the transport requirements of how you actually do the discovery are going to be the piece that wildly varies. What I would really like to do is make sure that when we have our information model put together for here's the things that are required, we've done at least enough of the analysis for the other scenarios to say here's things that are the same, here are the differences between them, and the motivation for that is part of our protocol design is mainly here's what the PDUs look like, to get things to talk to each other, how they get sense the longer conversation. But it does have impacts like, is this a fixed set of PDUs? Is this a flexible set of PDUs? Is this like a generic set of PDUs that you tack on a few TLVs for a specific scenario? And those things have radical impact on the design. So I don't want to preclude discussion about it for purposes of refining what goes in the information model. The transport discussions, I think, will work. Does that make sense, everybody? I don't want to do this as proof by assertion, but that's my thinking is leading me to.
Yeah, I think that's a good path.
Yeah, I agree with this approach. Yeah, we have been discussing about the requirements and the information to be carried in last year, and hopefully we can conclude on that part first. Then we can move on to the transport or the encapsulations.
So one thing we had Kater and I had in the LDP draft originally, and I wonder was whether or not you were going to use TCP MD5 or TCP AO authentication. If you desired to do that in the discovery, I see you have GTS. I always get it wrong. GTSM or GTMS. There.
Mm-hmm.
What? But you didn't have the other security that desire to use these authentication.
I hadn't mentioned it, but part of Thursday's discussion, you may recall, is that security is massively underspecified in every single proposal. And the reason why that's, I'm leaving that as massively underspecified is most people are leaving in basically a spot for a single set of TLV type information.
Kind of like people have encodings, but we don't have how this would bootstrap up, and what happens in different cases. I agree with that.
Well, no, it's actually messier than that. So let me walk you through the two distinct pieces.
Okay.
So what we're not actually even covering inside of the discussions to date in any of the proposals is what is the thing actually being secured. L3DL is actually a counter example. It's actually modestly well specified that it's covering the discovery information inside L3DL. And that's great. Now that's helping you build your trust relationship for that protocol layer. Mm-hmm. The auto discovery information is a thing itself subject to security. The BGP session that you may end up forming from auto discovery also is a thing subject to securing. That's a distinct element. Where things get a little bit messy is in some cases you may not want exactly one mechanism. So to give an easy example, let's say that you're willing as a peering entity, you're not willing to accept no authentication. You are willing to use IPsec, AO, or MD5. But for each of these, you'll need keychain hints so that each of the endpoints can arrange for it. So now you've actually taken it to not only a set of IP endpoints that have to be addressed, and we haven't talked about the, do you do parallel v4, v6, separate v4, v6, or v4 over v6 over 6 over 4. Those are all variations that Draft Shoe covers a little bit, not completely, but better than the other ones. But once you've actually decided, for a given transport endpoint set that you're willing to do, how do you arrive at a set of security information that you're willing to attempt to peer over on that? And that's not hard. It overlaps a little bit with what the IPsec guys like to call a security association, but it's not exactly the same thing because we're looking at a set of possible things to try and then figuring out what is the precedence in which you apply them to. So this is a big section all on its own.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
And I mean, some of this I think is also, we're discussing the requirements, not necessarily the full
implementation,
how this all works. So I think some of it can be punted to, we believe that we need authentication, ...
I believe one thing I'd like to clearly see is the difference between requirements and the difference between reviewing proposals to be clearly set. I think that's one thing that I liked in the sort of structure that G had. So is that something you feel comfortable with, Jeff and Warren and the rest of the team?
Well, so part of the point of noting that the authentication proposals are massively underspecified is the requirement that we end up needing is, is there a requirement that we're going to say you have to advertise exactly one association that you're willing to do? Well, in that case, you're precluding, some sort of authentication that could be different between the different parties. Basically, if you don't say there's got to be some method, if you say there's some method by which you can advertise more than one authentication type, that is two impacts. Number one, you need an operational proposal and whatever the design ends up coming out to in the next internet draft. But you're also stating up front that any proposal has to allow for more than one. So you have the multi-instance of your PDU.
That's the point. I'm not specifying a particular solution because I'm just monitoring this discussion. I'm simply stating clarity. Okay, and
I think that there's also, and I might be wrong here, so if the authors of the proposals can hit me with a big clue stick, but I think that some of the proposals are not fully fleshed out because people don't want to spend a huge amount of time to answer every possible, or document write up every possible part of the solution if it's not going to be used. So I get the feeling some of them have this sort of And don't worry, we can make other things, other TLVs/authentication work here, but we're not documenting it in excruciating detail because that might just be wasted time.
Yeah, and that's the point of doing the requirements end of the analysis. So the examples I gave out of security stuff, I know Randy would be rolling his eyeballs, but the trouble is you'd also, it's like, as much as Randy doesn't like overcomplicating protocols, these security impacts have these sort of things that have to be thought through. We don't have to specify in the requirements document what the implementation will look like. We just say you have to talk about these things.
Yeah. I mean, there is also, I guess this is kind of going down a rat hole, but there's also many people are happy to do authentication, but okay if you don't as well, right? And this is this is where it sort of strays out of the data center into external things. But a lot of people view the MD5 and similar as just a really strong checksum, not a real secret. And so does that need to be addressed or not? That we can talk about in the requirements.
So the nice thing is, and this is something to check with Sue and John about, the document states up front in both of the flavors that we're not intending to drive this document towards RFC. It's just simply a way to publish to the IETF, here's what we think the requirements are.
Yep.
This has a specific impact that, if we tried to do that to something that RFC, the security ADs will do what the security ADs tend to do. And it's like, you can't let this go on without actually talking about every one of these details. Like, no, it's not the place to do that.
Yep.
So Jeff, in that case, like a part of the discussions, like should we capture the security requirements as a section? Like what are the items we need to cover that AC mentioned, TCP, MD5, part of the sessions, MD5 or AO, then single TLB, all those requirements should we capture?
Right. So using requirements language, we have to discuss this is for securing BGP. This is a discovery protocol. We have to discuss this. A proposal must discuss what the security mechanism is for securing the discovery protocol. And since it is also going to be carrying information for securing a BGP session, and we're providing endpoint information, there must be enough information for BGP to be able to perform a transport session, which therefore means that the requirements has to say, a proposal has to say what it's going to do about providing enough information for the endpoints to successfully form a TCP session over that authentication. And that could be zero authentication. And the third sort of axis on this set of things is the operational implications. As Warren sort of emphasized on Friday, your trust domains can vary wildly based on what you're doing. So if you're doing a L2 based discovery protocol, you know that you're talking to the thing. If you know that you're talking to something at the end of the link and you're willing to just trust it because it's the thing at the end of the link, now that's a security implication. You're welcome to use no authentication as an example. Or you could decide that you don't trust the people who are managing your wires, and therefore you actually have this. So the operational security section has to be done in each of the proposals covering these points.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, from an operational side, there's a trade-off between many different axes here. If I don't care about authentication and I trust the people who install stuff, I can almost, but not quite, unpack a switch on the box, plug it in, and magic happens. If I don't trust the people plugging stuff in and I want authentication, I have to do a bunch of pre-configuration on the device before it all gets plugged in and turned up. And so that has implications for how much of the autoconf stuff happens by itself and how much my orchestration system needs to do. Whatever the case, one thing I did want to mention is Jeff and I are listed as editors on the document. This means that we take people's review and comments and thoughts and things. So something that's really important is people need to please read the documents and provide us feedback so we can be all editorial and put things in, not just make stuff up from whole cloth.
Right, and the point that Warren also just touched on that I think is a important detail. We are effective. No, the group is labeled BGP AutoConf. We're sort of acting effectively as the BGP transport AutoConf.
Yes.
And while I think that a bigger solution, like how do you make your specific box completely able to just automatically be plugged in and put itself into a switch fabric as an example. There's other implications on BGP auto configuration outside of transport that has to be dealt with here. And one of the things that has to be in the our end of the requirements for the transport requirements is there information that transport must provide to the next set of upper layers to help it figure out important things. So that's one of the reasons why role has showed up in more than one of the proposals. If I say that I'm a transport endpoint and my role is Clo Fabric, level 1, for whatever that happens to mean for you, well, that means that your device that actually is smart enough to use that can do something that makes sense. Can you move that piece of information out of transport and into BGP, maybe in part of the open messages? That's a possibility as well. So that's where one of the interesting scoping lines will be for how do you actually allow for the full auto configuration picture for full ZTP rather than just transport gets discussed.
Chairman, what are you going to define where you're restricting your data information? Or are you going to discuss this problem in the initial draft?
The initial draft is going to, again, try to heavily point out for the information model, here is what information is required to get the transport job done. And we'll try to throw in some level of first level discussion of, for other things, if you need help with the transport layer, it may belong here. But the line, once you're able to form any sort of transport session, the line blurs very quickly because BGP open at that point can do the job for you. And that's the general leaning of the design team in the prior discussions. Do as much in the open as you can, but if you can't get to open, well, that's the requirements we're working on.
Any other questions, thoughts, things you need Jeff and Warren to get to a first straw man for people to poke at?
So this is Warren. I think the main thing is people to read/reread the existing set of documents so that they're familiar with them and can point out where we've missed things or where we've got things incorrect or interesting notices like this particular proposal solves this thing, which, on reflection turns out it really is actually a requirement. Can the other protocols also do that? Or is this really a requirement? Often it's helpful to see what facilities a protocol provides to be able to sort of catch requirements that you might not have thought of.
Okay, so then what I'm really going to strongly encourage everyone to do is reread all the documents one more time. I read them last week, but I think I'll go back and reread them one more time, given Jeff's comments, and we'll be ready for next week. Do you think, Jeff and Warren, you'll have either a few more bullet points or a document by next week?
I'm really hoping that end of today, early tomorrow, I'll have at least all the stuff integrated so that I can pass around. Here's what I think we want to actually do. I could have some of the to-dos in the initial document. I need to also read the GitHub procedures because my personal inclination for a lot of the stuff is I just push out stuff in private branches that has to-do items in there, and as long as it's in a private branch, it's not considered canonical. I'm just not sure what IETF tends to say about that, since I lost track of that discussion about a year ago.
I mean, I think that a lot of the stuff is sufficiently still open and up in the air that you can just stick it in the main branch, in GitHub, and we just don't push it as a draft up to the IETF. And so people can just read the main one. My concern is if we have 27 different sub-branches, it's hard for people to understand how they fit together.
And my reading of the policy, as I read it last week in the 2 RFCs, which Warren, I hope that represents, the 2 RFCs represents the IETF policy, is it's working group or working group / design teams. So my reading is, Jeff, if it's more comfortable for you to do it in the main branch, do it in the main branch, because it'll be easier. Private branches are useful if we have some major disagreement.
So just
No,
a
if
quick
you have 2
clarification.
people, if you guys are going to be the editors and we're going to review, like we said, that was going to be the mode of operation. I don't see any reason, if you want to do something, you could publish it. Publish the first draft, or I guess you don't want people to review it. Maybe that's not a good day, but if only 2 people, I can't see creating branches.
And one quick important clarification. Those RFCs on GitHub are not the IETF policy. There are some ideas and thoughts on how you all might want to use GitHub.
Right.
We specifically, or at least people can correct me, but I believe we specifically do not have policies on using GitHub. It's just, there are some ideas on how, on things we found that have worked well. If you want to deviate from them, that's okay too.
Yeah, and one of the things that GitHub also allows us to do is structure our things towards open issues. So once we've actually broken things down to specific issues that need conclusion, you can track the issues there. The discussion doesn't have to happen in the system. I know some people have done that. My general inclination is once we've gotten things down to this must be addressed, we can use the issue tracker if we feel like it. I don't have a strong opinion about doing that. I'm quite happy wrangling that through email.
Yep. We can also do, people use the issue tracker if that's easier for them. People use email if that's easier for them. I mean, I think email's best, but some people have very strong, it's easier to track it in GitHub. But that's also once we've got a version out or more text out.
In any case, I think we'll have a better sense once I've done the first integration pass and have all things at least in one document. From there we can decide what the actual work is at that point.
All of that works for me. So any more questions? I'll ask one more time.
So one question. So are you going to share this slide, or we just wait for Jeff to come up with the initial version?
So I'd like to have something that we work against, because that helps. And the reason I asked Jeff what his timing was is because if that's fairly close, then that's a good thing. In the meantime, there's a lot of documents to read and reread, Cossack, which I sent out in that were included in the last PowerPoint slide I sent. I will also send this PowerPoint slide, this slide of things that Jeff mentioned in email, if you'd like to see that as well.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good. The last point, I think, Jeff, you mentioned in your requirements, I think I saw that multicast discovery. I think, not sure we talked too much on that side, but we can discuss more on the next time if you have more details.
So I'm not precluding any sort of discussion right now. If you have opinions about something,
no, I just wanted to know, what's your thought on the multicast discovery? I saw the note in the.
Very tersely, once we've decided what goes inside of the protocol, we have multiple flavors of multicast involved. Whether it's we have outright unicast mechanisms. Like we could do this, via ARP discovery as an example for a form of unicast. For multicast, we have obviously L2, like LODP does is one of its forms. L3DL also does things both to the IEEE 802 idea of multicast to the directly attached stuff or across the switch fabric. There are different MACs for that. And then IP multicast leverages those MAC addresses to flood across the entire multicast domain. That's all things on this link, but a link is basically an entire switching domain from a L2 standpoint. And each one of these things, I think, has implications for different environments. So as an example, if you believe that you're largely a boring link that is not really Ethernet, it's mostly meant to be used as a point-to-point, a L3 multicast, talking to that, they tell you there's one thing there as you expect, and they tell you there's more than one thing, and they decide what to do about that. If you're trying to do things for switch fabric, you may only want to talk to the thing that's on the direct opposite end of your port, in which case you want to use a different encapsulation for that. And part of the discussions that's going to have to happen is, since there's going to be multiple domains, potentially with multiple protocols for syncing it, potentially those protocols are serving other purposes. You have to decide, what do you do about your BGP? They give an easy 3 examples there. We have an internal implementation that does auto discovery based on both ARP and the LODP. You have to decide what your precedence is when you have information from both. And you have a different example if you happen to have something like L3DL. L3DL has got proposed extensions for carrying BGP discovery in there, but that's not its primary purpose, aside from running LCR. So what do you do when you have conflicting purposes? Those are all discussion points.
Okay.
Okay, so what I understand from this week's work is that Jeff and Warren are going to get together and put a straw man out. Everyone in the meantime is going to go and read all the documents that were sent out. I'll send a list again, and then we'll review and comment on the BGP AutoConf list, and we'll get together next week to have any in-person discussions. Jeff and Warren, as editors, it would be helpful if you suggest any points you need clarification by Monday next week. Is that a good way to work, folks?
I think so. And I think also if people can just, as they think of things, throw emails into the mailing list as well, just so we don't accidentally miss anything.
Awesome. More communication equals better.
Jeff, anything that you're missing?
No, I think I've done enough talking for today.
Okay, I will try to listen to the recording and send out notes to try to help everyone come up to speed, but I thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you re-engaging and spending some time to get the data center portion out. And Robert, please throw in, I think we lost Robert, I'll send him a note. I really want him to continue to push stuff for the WAN and exchange point. Have a great day. I think we're done, Jeff, unless Warren, you or someone else has another point.
I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.